Welcome back to Worst Seats in the House. Michael Russo, Anthony LaPanta. Anthony coming to us from Ottawa. I'm coming to you from Minnesota with my colleague Joe Smith on the road trip. Our next live show is February 5th at Splitrocks, but we thought we'd do an early podcast, early February pod before that, just with all the news going on the last week or so with Kirill Kaprizov's injury and subsequent surgery, and then obviously the incredible atmosphere in Montreal with Marc-Andre Fleury the other night. And let's start with that, Anthony. I'll tell you, like watching on TV, first of all, you guys did, you and Louis and your broadcast team, the crew did an incredible job of just documenting everything, letting things breathe when it needed to. And I think the one thing that game really showed was just how universally this guy is loved by opposing teams, opposing teammates, opposing fans. And it was just a really beautiful game.
Yeah, we've talked about that a little bit here over the last day and a half, trying to somehow come up with some comparisons and equivalents and those kind of things to put it into words and to put it among the moments and the games that we've had over the years. And to me, there were a few things that popped up. One is that it was an example of just how special the culture and the respect for the game and those that have played in the game is around the National Hockey League. And as far as the moment goes, as far as a regular season game goes, I'm not sure I've been a part of a more special night. I mean, that we were there for Fleury's game in Pittsburgh, and that was cool. You know, there were a few that stood out to me, like Nate Prosser scoring on Hockey Day when it was hosted in Elk River, Goligoski scoring in overtime on a night where he's honored for his 1,000th game, Koivu getting the shootout winner in a game where he's honored for 1,000. I mean, there have been some special moments, but none, I think, that compare to what we saw in that game in Montreal. And in fact, we were sitting at dinner last night and we were trying to say, all right, what would be the equivalent? Like, think of another sport. Like, so think of a player, and we were trying to put it in Minnesota perspective. It'd be like the best guy we could come up with was Kevin McHale, to say, all right, the greatest basketball player to come from our state, but never played for our team, because Fleury never played for Montreal. And let's say he came back for his last game in the state of Minnesota. The crowd would certainly have paid tribute, would have honored, would have cheered, whatever. The other team, the home team, wouldn't have stood at half court waiting to shake his hand when the game was over. They wouldn't have had a number one star ceremony where he came out. The crowd wouldn't likely have been chanting his name during warmups and during the halfway through the third period of the game. I mean, it was so special. It was so cool to be a part of it. It's a night I'll never forget, and it's one of those moments in our line of work as media members covering the team where you really just feel fortunate to have gotten to see it, gotten to live it, gotten to be a part of it. And I do think our crew did a terrific job capturing it, and some of the camera angles that we got in Montreal were that I think showed exactly what the emotion were pretty special.
Yeah, I agree with you. And it was a perfect night. I mean, you couldn't have written it better. I mean, a shutout in his final game there, his mom, his sister, his cousins, his wife, his kids all fly up for the game. Team stays after, so he gets to celebrate. And the one thing I'll say is that this wasn't just, like, obviously the Montreal Canadiens, they're actually doing a lot better than any of us anticipated this year, and they're actually close to a playoff spot. But this is a team that's had some big wins lately over teams like the Lightning, Utah, Dallas, Washington, Colorado, Vancouver. I mean, this is a team, Vegas. I mean, I'm just going on and on of how many teams they've beaten here, since really Christmas time. So this is a team that has scored a bunch of goals as well. And the Wild just did a tremendous job in front of him that night, protecting him. And then there were some vintage Fleury moments. The one sequence where not only does he have the vintage Marc-Andre Fleury poke check, but then they hit the post. He goes and gives it his customary kisses and thank you to the post. Later, he has the 2-pad stack on Josh Anderson. And then he finishes it up by getting the shutout with his best friend on the team, Freddie Gaudreau, scoring the empty netter. It really was just a perfect night.
It was, and that was the other thing we talked about is there's just some guys who, when the moment is big, they elevate to that level. And there was no way the Wild were going to lose that game. And that you knew the guys, it was kind of the same feel we had in Pittsburgh. Even though Pittsburgh scored twice early, you knew there was no way the Wild were going to lose that game. The guys were going to play so hard in front of them. On this night in Montreal, they gave the Canadiens nothing in the first two periods. And then Fleury had to be good in the third. And your point about Montreal, I mean, I think we had a graphic going back to, I think the cutoff date was December 17th. They were the fourth best team in the NHL from that point to now. So they've been playing great hockey for a month and a half. And it was the Wild shut them down. They did largely the same thing they did to Toronto in the first game on this trip. But there are just guys that when the spotlight is the brightest, they step up and fire a bullet. And Fleury is one of those guys. And on a night where you knew it was going to be his night, there was no way that he wasn't going to play well. I never would have gone into it predicting a shutout, but there was no way that he or the Wild were going to lose that game.
And, just like Pittsburgh, right before that power play in Pittsburgh in the first period, they do the acknowledgement and he's just like, please drop the puck. Here, with about 7 minutes left in a game where he's trying to get a shutout, they do the same thing. And then this one really breathed for a while. I mean, the fans went crazy. Just an emotional moment. He's got tears coming down his cheeks, and yet he's still able to compose himself enough to finish that game. And then for the Canadians to, stay on the ice after the game, shake his hand. Marty St. Louis, the same thing. I know Marty said it was their obligation for the respect that this guy has in the game. And that's the one thing about Marc-Andre Fleury, to your point at the very beginning of this, is I don't think that we'll ever see a player like him again in this league that's as beloved as him in every single building. And obviously it's back home. He comes from a long line of incredible Quebec born goalies in the NHL. Luongo, Patrick Roy, Marty Brodeur follows in all their footsteps, although he preceded, although he came right after Fleury, Luongo, but they have a very tight relationship as well. It's pretty special about the guy that plays for a Minnesota Wild team that hasn't had its share of legends, that's for sure.
He's at the top of that list. And I don't know that we'll ever see another guy that comes into the league as a teenager and goes out of the league as a 40-year-old especially in that role as a goaltender. It just doesn't happen. And when he came into the league, he was I think he was the youngest by 3 years in the NHL when he made his debut. So just think about that. I mean, now he's probably, I don't know, the oldest by how many years at this point, but it's crazy to think that he was in the league before he turned 20 and still in the league as he's turned 40. It really is an incredible run. And there were just those moments that were Fleury moments. He had a big glove save. He had the poke check. He had the double pad stack. He just has a flair for those kind of plays and does it with a smile. And in every city, you and I have both seen it in most of these cities. They do a little tribute to him, and there's always somebody. And I guess when you've been around that long, there's a connection to somebody on just about every team, every organization, and as universally liked as any player I've ever come across.
Without a doubt. I remember 4 years ago when the Wild acquired him. I don't think anybody thought that 4 years later he would still be here. He's re-signed twice. It's a huge honor for these. I've talked to Foligno about this a lot. I mean, it is a huge honor for these Wild players to share a locker room with him and be part of so many of these big moments. His 500th win, his 1,000th game. He's about to tie Luongo in starts. Being part of the other night as well. It's a huge honor for him. And I do think that, long past Marc-Andre Fleury, I think that none of us really understood the type of person that Bill Guerin was putting in the locker room. And I think that the culture that he has helped instill in Minnesota is gonna post-date him here. And that one big thing that I'm curious at is what happens with Marc-Andre after his career. Does he immediately start working for the Wild in some capacity? I don't think Bill Guerin wants to let him get away. What does he want that to be in his future? I don't think that Marc-Andre Fleury has any aspirations just to be a goalie coach. But he could be somebody, especially since, I've reported that, that dream home that he was building in Vegas, he's already put on the market. It looks like he's changed his post retirement plans and might even consider, especially because he has a beautiful house outside Montreal, that might maybe even staying here in Minnesota. And if that's the case, do you have him in that front office in some capacity where you could put him, work with young players, go, learn every area of the organization, and be kind of like, an apprentice, sort of what Alex Goligoski, Derek Stepan, and some of these players are doing in their post retirement here in Minnesota. I don't think that Bill Guerin's going to want them to get away.
I don't think so either, and I don't know what that role will be. I get the sense that for him, and he's not the only one, but sometimes guys are a little awkward in jumping into that role quickly just because these are their teammates. And to now all of a sudden be in a coaching role or a front office role, a consulting role of any kind is a little awkward. And I kind of get the sense like he would view it that way. But I do think somehow, some way, they'll try to keep him, the Wild will definitely try to keep him involved in the organization. And it'll just be a matter of how long is it before he's ready to come back and sit down with Philip Gustafson and say, hey, here's what you could do better, or here's a way I might be able to help you. I think it's almost the humility of Marc-Andre Fleury that would prevent him from doing that quickly. And he's not the only one. I want to make that clear. There are a lot of guys who feel that way. Like I don't want to walk in the room and all of a sudden be pulling video clips to show my former teammate of, hey, here's what the hell are you doing on this play? And so I would guess that Fleury might be a couple of years. I want to be a little bit removed, want to be just a little bit on the periphery. Wouldn't mind voicing my opinion inside a room with other front office people, but I'm not ready yet to step back in that locker room in a role other than a player.
Yeah, I could see that. I could see what you're saying. The one thing I'll say is when I talked to Marc-Andre about this a couple times this year, but earlier this season when we were in Florida, the one thing he did say is that he's been told that the longer you get out of it, the harder it is to get back in, which wouldn't be the case for him. He's going to make one phone call and somebody's hiring him. But two, maybe your passion goes away as well, and then you want to be full-time dad and things like that. So I do think that the one thing is just sort of having him around. How cool would it be to just sit there and hey, Mark, Liam Ogren's having some issues. Can you go down and chat with him? Can you go work a little bit with Jesper Wallstedt? Things like that. Just having him at your disposal, I think, would be just such a coup for this team. But it's been, usually you try to be completely professional and not talk to players like this, especially when you've covered thousands of guys like you and I have, Anthony. But it really is a true honor to cover this guy. What you see with him is what you get. He's the most genuine athlete I've ever talked to. He is the nicest person, loves shooting the breeze, loves talking hockey. It's truly one of my favorite things to do in the locker room every single day when I'm just sort of in the middle loitering and have nothing to do. I just kind of stroll over to his stall after a practice and just shoot the breeze with him about, literally anything and everything. So, I was there right from day one of his career. It was the Florida Panthers that had the number 1 overall pick in 2003 and traded it to the Pittsburgh Penguins to draft Marc-Andre Fleury. And then the Panthers dropped to 3. If they dropped to 2, they could have taken Eric Stahl, but they dropped to 3 and wound up taking Nathan Horton with that pick. I probably would have kept number 1 and taken Stahl, but that would have been just me. But anyway, what a great career by Marc-Andre Fleury. It's not done yet, but man, it is closing fast. And he's trying not to think about it, but I think he's starting to get more and more sentimental here as we get down the stretch, Anthony.
Yeah, his post-game press conference was interesting to watch, where you could tell I was surprised he was as composed as he was out on the ice. And you had mentioned earlier about the delay. I heard it was Ryan Hartman was waiting to take the draw, and I guess the linesman had gone over to him and said, I'm not dropping the puck till this ends. And Hartman looked at him and said, this isn't going to end until you drop the puck. So it's, that was what it felt like. But as we showed Fleury a few times, I thought I'm mildly surprised that he's able to maintain his composure. And he talked about it afterward. He said there were some watery eyes for sure, but not behind the mask. It was a special moment and just a night that I'll not soon forget.
No doubt about it. Let's take a quick break and we'll be back here on More Seats in the House. Aquarius Home Services is your longest sponsor of War Seats in the House, and they do absolutely everything from heating and cooling to electrical, plumbing, just everything. But the one thing that they do have that I've had in my house for years is the Connecticut water treatment system. They are a local authorized dealer, and that you can enjoy smoother, softer skin, shiny fixtures, cleaner, softer laundry, and spot-free dishes. Great tasting coffee, by the way. And the Connecticut water treatment system has zero electricity. It provides worry-free water, peace of mind, no dials or timers to worry about. And by the way, I'm amazed how little salt I use. In fact, I got bags and bags of salt in my garage. So if you want to get 25% off a whole home Connecticut water treatment system, well, you got to go to Aquarius Home Services now to schedule your free water analysis. Do it today for worry-free water all winter long. Again, AquariusHomeservices.com for your free water analysis. Aquarius, earning the right to be recommended. And don't forget to mention that Russo sent you.
When it comes to great steaks, it's all about the marbling. And there's a 1 through 12 scale for marbling that will measure what the quality is of the steak. And for Feller's Ranch Wagyu, it's some of the best you'll find. They won't sell their steaks unless they're at a marbling level of 6 to 10 on a scale of 12. It's some of the best steaks you'll find. Just for reference, USDA Prime can be called USDA Prime as long as it's at 3 or 4 on that same scale. This steak is some of the best I've had. You can find it at fellersranch.com. Their vans are in the cities every week. They can deliver it to you. There are also a couple of spots within the cities where you can pick it up. You won't be disappointed. If you're having a great meal and you want to have steak, there's no place to go that's better than Feller's Ranch.
Keep the good times rolling without the regrets. Giggly THC beverages are your go-to for bold flavor and smooth vibes. Zero alcohol and no bad decisions. Just THC-infused cocktails, seltzers, and teas packed with natural ingredients and performance-boosting superfoods like ashwagandha and ginseng. Find Giggly at over 500 locations like Total Wine, MGM, and Cub Foods, or shop online at giggly.com. That's GIGLI.com. Ready to upgrade your drink game? We'll use code GIGLYNORTH for 50% off your first order. Giggly. Sip smarter, feel better. Michael Russo, Anthony LaPanta, back here, Worst Seats in the House. Anthony's got a game in Ottawa tonight with the Wild having won 3 in a row, of course, on the road because they never win at home. And playing really well against an Ottawa team that could be tough. They're having trouble scoring lately, but obviously you look at the laundry list of players on their roster and they could light you up pretty quickly. The game's usually physical. Philip Gustafson back there for his revenge tour every time he goes to Ottawa. He loves trying to beat that team.
Yeah. You know what's interesting though? I looked at as I was digging into Ottawa's numbers a little, and there have been 3 teams in the East that it feels like it's been a decade, and it really has been about 5 years where we've been talking about their rebuilding process. Is this the year they make the step? Buffalo, Detroit, and Ottawa. And they've got the 3 longest playoff droughts in the NHL. It's been 13 years for Buffalo, 8 years for the Red Wings, 7 for the Senators that they've missed. And this Ottawa club, we've been talking about a young core of talented players, mostly in terms of offense, although, Sanderson and Shabbat certainly are guys that you've talked about on the back end. But it's usually been a team that could score but couldn't stop others from scoring. And right now, they sit inside a playoffs, inside the playoff picture in the East, and it's because they've been playing better defense. And you mentioned their scoring numbers are down, and they are. But if you go back to about Thanksgiving, November 25th, they're the 3rd best team in the NHL. Only Edmonton and Washington have a better record since then. It's been a long stretch of good hockey for Ottawa, and over that stretch, it's been because of defense, not because of offense. Their scoring numbers are actually down a little bit. So at the beginning of the season, they started the year 8-11. They were averaging more than 3 goals per game, but they were giving up 3 1/4. And now since then, since the date I mentioned, they're 19-9-3. It's the 3rd best record in the league. Their scoring is down a half a goal a game. They're only averaging 2.5, but their goals against is down almost a full goal per night. They're averaging 2.39 goals against over their last 31 games. So I think it's a team that's finally probably figured out, you know what? We can try and outscore everybody, but if we want to win games and make the playoffs, we got to change the way we're playing on the other end of the ice, and they seem to have done that.
Yeah, and I think the Wild could use that excuse, could use that advice at home, by the way, because that's the way that they play on the road. And before we get into Kirill Kaprizov, Anthony, have you're big into numbers. Have you started? I got an interesting question from a reader or somebody that tweeted, and of course I can't find it this second, but the gist of it, oh, here it is. It's from Bo Van Beek, who always asks great questions on this show. He goes, have you looked at, or do you want to do the research? Has an NHL team that's over 500 ever had such a discrepancy between winning percentage on the road versus winning percentage at the home like the Wild have right now? They have no confidence, or he has no confidence in them at home and all the confidence in the world on the road. And I'll tell you what, you could converse that because I'm telling you, like, I think it's the Wild as well. Because the way they talk about themselves at home versus the way they talk about themselves on the road is it translates right on the ice. And it has become a thing. As much as John Hines' last homestand tried to make it not a thing, it is a thing. They have more road wins than they had all of last season right now.
Yes, they do. And believe me, we've asked John about it so many times in our conversations with him, and they're well aware of it and looking for answers for it. Now, there have been a few where it's been awkward scheduling, bad timing for certain, where they had a pretty tough stretch at home where it was Colorado, Vegas, and Florida all in the same homestand, and it happened to be when they were really beat up. There was a couple times where it was long trips, late travel, late arrival, and where a lot of teams are dragging in that first game home. But there have also been plenty where it's just been laid an egg at home, and they've avoided that on the road, which I think has drawn almost more attention to it. So the answer to the question that was asked is no, I haven't looked into that yet, although I have done some differential with points percentage home versus road. And this is one of the largest, just because it was the largest the Wild have ever had. And part of that is because they haven't had this poor of a home record. They've only had a worse home points percentage one time in their history. And so I haven't looked at it historically yet. I'll dig into that a little bit, especially if it continues here. And I just think it's a team that has bought into a style of play, and that style of play maybe is easier to commit to playing that way when you're on the road. There hasn't always been something that you would notice with the naked eye where it's been, well, they're trying to do too much at home. They're trying to make highlight reel plays. I haven't really seen that as often, but it's been everything. The block shots are way up on the road. We talked about that the other night in Toronto when they blocked 22. They're averaging about 4 or 4.5 more per game when they're on the road compared to home. On the road, they're fourth in the league. At home, they're dead last in blocks per night. And their save percentage on the road is number one in the league. At home, it's near the bottom. So it's just been a combination of a lot of things. But we've talked to John. In fact, we've gone so far as to start to wonder, what would you do if this continued to the end of the season? And he hasn't answered the question yet. He's just said, we've talked about it, thought about it. I don't know. Would you try to create road games at home? Let's say you're in the playoffs. Would you try to do something like, hey, let's have the team like a football team does quite often. Let's have the team move downtown and stay in a hotel before you play a home playoff game. It's a lot to ask for people with families and lives and everything, but I think you really have to start to consider it. And if it's me, I'd be considering anything. I'd be considering that. I'd be considering shifting morning skate back to the XL Energy Center. They've been skating at Tria most of the season, almost every time. Maybe it's something about go back to the game rink for your morning skates. I don't know. At this point, I'd be willing to try anything to figure out what it is that's different at home.
I like Eric's next idea. Wear white uniforms maybe they take the visitors' locker room. Maybe they ask they
Something.
tell the referees before the game, hey, I know that we get last change, but you know what? Give them that courtesy. They'll give the visiting team.
Yeah. We'd like to give that to them. They did win the night they had the whiteout at home, didn't they? If I remember right.
Yeah.
So maybe that's something.
Maybe
just
they're
to
all
throw the white
colorblind, and
jerseys on.
they're colorblind. They can't recognize the green jerseys now. I don't know. Something's
I don't
up.
know, but I mean, I really would. I would be considering trying anything at this point, and maybe like coming out of the Four Nations break would be the time to do it. They have 2 home games after they get home from this trip, and maybe during that time, take a look at it. It would be an easy time to do some kind of a reset, some kind of a change. But let's say they continue on this trip, get a win or 3 out of 4 or something in these games in Ottawa and Boston. If they then come home and struggle, they've got Carolina and the Islanders in those last 2. And if it continues, I really think you'd have to sit down with the leadership group of the team and say, guys, I know that everybody likes the way we do things at home, but it ain't working. We got to try something to shake this loose, and let's just see what happens.
Yeah, find a priest and do an exorcism or something. They better figure it out. They have 11 home games in March, 7 in a row at one point. Turned a homestand against some really quality teams coming in, including Colorado, the LA Kings, but this is obviously a winnable March if you could turn this around and figure this out, because they absolutely have to. I don't get it. It's just bizarre. All right, Kirill Kaprizov. There was something. So sometimes I always say Hasta's job is reporter instinct. Okay, so he plays 3 in a row. And I was really watching him in Chicago, like really, really, really watching him, and it just was so obvious to me that he didn't have any pop. He was the most dangerous guy on the ice, I felt that night, but yet there was just something about his explosiveness. And then I walk into the locker room after the game, and it's a celebratory locker room. Zuccarello's in the corner making a bunch of jokes next to Kirill, and Kirill is glum as can be. And then he gets up, he goes to the changing room, he comes back in, I say hi to him. You could just tell he was like, he wasn't limping or anything, but he was just like, there was something wrong. And he walks into the trainer's room, and that's when the next day I started making a bunch of calls. And I remember I texted you around noon on Monday, and I said, hey, I'm hearing some bad stuff about Kirill. And then I was able to confirm it later that night, but we waited to Tuesday to basically, I couldn't get anybody from the organization to confirm what I was hearing, that he was about to go under the knife. But we waited till 11 a.m. to break the story, just because, or 10:30, I think, when practice started, just because I wanted to make sure 100% he was not on the ice before we reported it. But he underwent surgery on Friday. I'm told that whatever happened with the surgery, that the timeline has not changed. So that would lead you to believe that they either fixed the problem or didn't find something new that they got to fix right now. So that's good. Minimum of 4 weeks, potentially 6. But clearly, he knows his own body. This was his decision and his agent's decision to get this taken care of now, because he feels that to his standard, he can't play up to what he thinks he could do to help this team win, Anthony.
Yeah, all that's true. And I thought Billy's comments were accurate when he just said, look, he could push through this at 60%. Kirill Kaprizov is still better than most of the guys in the league, but this team has aspirations of more. And we've talked all year about the fact that they've built enough of a cushion with their start where they have the luxury. And I always want to preface this by saying this isn't a team that's looking at it saying we've already wrapped up a playoff spot. They don't feel that way. They aren't looking at it that way. But I think if you were sitting in a spot where you were fighting for your playoff lives right now, if you were, let's say you were 2 points out of the playoff picture, you might have to make a different decision. They're 10 points clear of the first team out right now. And I'm sure they're looking at this saying, if we are going to have any chance against the potential opponents that we're going to see in the playoffs, which right now are Colorado, Dallas, Vegas, or Winnipeg, look like the most likely opponents. And against any one of those teams, can you win with Kirill Kaprizov at 60%? Probably not. So if you do this and you pick this timing right here, where 4 to 6 weeks and 2.5 of it is a league-wide break over the Four Nations tournament, why not do it right now And who knows? Will he come back at 100%? I don't know. I'm not a medical expert in any way. He might not be 100% at any point this season, but he's going to be a lot closer to it than if he had continued to try to push through. We both know Kirill Kaprizov, and if they say 4 to 6 weeks, at 2.5 weeks, he's going to be saying he's ready to get back on the ice. And at 4 weeks, he's going to say, put my name in the lineup. And we'll have to wait to see exactly what that timing is. But the bottom line is that this is the decision that I think is best for the player and the team to say, let's make sure this guy is as close to 100% as possible when it comes time at the end of the season.
Yeah, I agree with you. And it'll be curious if we could ever get to the bottom of exactly what he was feeling. The only thing I could tell you is that at the very beginning, nobody wanted to do surgery. Everybody, Bill Guerin pointed out, the player as well. Everybody, you want to avoid surgery. Obviously, hindsight being 2020, you wish now that whatever he's dealing with, they got fixed back in December, and then he'd be coming back to the lineup now as opposed to leaving the lineup. But the good news is with the Four Nations, that's 2 weeks where they're not playing games. If he returns even at that 6-week threshold, they'll have 16 games left, including a huge homestand, that they can get him back into the lineup. But as one person did point out, like, it's typical Minnesota Wild where it's like they can't even take advantage of his LTIR. Like other teams like Tampa and Vegas always figure out a way. And right now the Wild can't. But the way the injuries are going, Anthony, like by the time the trade deadline happens, somebody else is going to be out. And maybe, and that's why I think Bill Guerin keeps on saying we will do whatever we can with the available cap space that we have, because he knows that a lot could change by March 7th. There's still 5 weeks to go. There's, right now, if all things being equal, if nobody's on season-ending LTIR, his hands are tied on what he could do at the trade deadline because they have literally no cap space. But if all of a sudden somebody else is out, maybe for the year, that changes the narrative at that point.
Yeah, that does. And I always caution saying that there's nothing you can do, because there's always a solution. It might just take a lot more creativity. Maybe it means a player has to go that's currently under contract, that right now we're looking at as, well, he's locked. I mean, even guys that have deals that say you can't trade him or move him, there's always a way. I mean, maybe that guy's willing to waive it or change it or whatever, modify it. And you just never know. It's unlikely for certain, but if there's something, you don't know what's going to change, who's going to be hurt, who might be playing great, who might be struggling, who might be back in the minors, who might surface. There's just a lot that could change between now and then. And so I'd never say never with the ability to make a deal, even if the deal ends up being minor. And I don't know if we've talked so many times about the fact that if you're the Minnesota Wild, would you look at this season and say, we're this piece away from winning 16 games in the playoffs, winning 4 rounds? I don't know yet if I would be able to look at this club and realistically say you're a top 6 winger away from being the best team in the NHL, or even being one of the top 2 or 3, like we've talked about before, where if you go into the playoffs as one of the teams that you're one of the handful that has a legit chance to be the last team standing. I don't know yet. I'm not sure I'd be ready to make that kind of commitment to say, let's give away a piece of the future and try to, I would never say go all in, because they're limited. They can't really make the major splash trade, but even to look at it and say, like, going out and grabbing a big piece at the deadline, I'm not sure that's a viable option for this club anyway.
I couldn't agree more. And to me, it's like, are you really giving up a Liam Ogren? Because again, they traded their first round pick. So you're going to have to give up a top prospect to probably get something at the deadline, or a future first round pick. And are you really going to give up a Liam Ogren to go get that player? The Wild still have to go up against Roope Hintz in the playoffs, Mark Scheifele in the playoffs, Jack Eichel in the playoffs, Connor McDavid in the playoffs, Nathan McKinnon in the playoffs. That's where this team still lacks, is at, up the middle. As good as Rossi and Eriksson have been, they don't have that dynamic number one center. And I do think that's sometimes the reason why this team, isn't ready to take that next step. Anthony, when we come back, I want to talk to you about some of the huge blockbusters that happened in the league this week. Mikko Rantanen being traded to Carolina, JT Miller being traded to the Rangers. I have a couple Twitter questions for you as well. Then we'll wrap things up so you can get to the arena and for the morning skate for the Minnesota Wild. We'll be right back on Worst Seats in the House.
Hockey isn't the only thing happening on the ice, and as lakes are freezing over, it's time for ice fishing. OnX Fish offers the most comprehensive fishing tools for increasing your confidence and success on the hard water. Use the Fish app to find new places to fish and sort lakes by species, abundance, trophy, and keeper potential. OnX Fish also shows you hotspots, lake-by-lake regulations, and private and public land ownership information. For a limited time, download OnX Fish for free in Minnesota and Wisconsin, or go to onxmaps.com/fish to get more information on the app that is changing the game on ice.
Watch your dreams and savings grow with a Royal Credit Union certificate. Whether you're saving for college, a vacation, wedding, or a down payment on a house, Royal's 4.25% annual percentage yield 12-month certificate can help you reach your savings goals faster. Royal certificates have no minimum opening balance and a locked-in rate for a guaranteed return at maturity. Open now at any Royal office or online at rcu.org/certificate saver. Early withdrawal penalties could reduce earnings and principal. APY accurate as of 2/1/25. Insured by NCUA.
Hey, have you been dreaming of a lake cabin lifestyle with boating, fishing, and family fun in northern Minnesota? Well, lately I've thought a lot about how cool it would be to have a getaway like so many Minnesotans. And if you're like me, you probably think that owning your own lakeside getaway is beyond your budget. Well, if you think lake cabin real estate prices keep going up, well, think again. This is Russo, and I'm here to tell you there is an affordable way to enjoy a cabin lifestyle and all that goes with it. And yes, I said affordable. I founded a Clamshell Beach Resort, which is located on the Whitefish chain of 14 lakes for you and your family to enjoy. Here's how. Clamshell has lake homes that offer deeded fractional ownership, and the keywords there are deeded and fractional. You own it. Imagine having 5 weeks a year to enjoy Clamshell with its beaches, pool, and lodge that's full of kids' activities. Is golf your game? There's a great golf course right across the road. Like winter sports? Well, you can go ice fishing, cross-country skiing, or snowmobiling right out the door at Clamshell. And there's no maintenance, no grass mowing, no snow removal. It's done all for you. And you can own a share of Clamshell Beach Resort at an affordable price. To learn more about ownership opportunities at Clamshell Beach Resort, go to cottagesonwhitefish.com or contact Pat Egan at 612-220-9819. That's cottagesonwhitefish.com or Pat Egan at 612-220-9819.
Welcome back to Worst Seats in the House. Michael Russo, Anthony LaPanta. Final few minutes of the show. February 5th is our next live show at Splitrocks, and then we'll have 2 shows in March that are live as well. But February 5th at 7 p.m. at Splitrocks, the day that that Anthony gets back from the road trip, essentially. You're gonna have a couple days in Boston, Anthony. What are you gonna do? This is one of your favorite cities.
It is one of my favorites. It was disappointing to not get a night off in Montreal where we could have dinner. We did stay after the game, so I went to one of my favorite cocktail bars there and had a couple cocktails after the game that night, but didn't get a chance to go have dinner. Is that the same
cocktail bar where you showed off your French once and it didn't go well?
No. That's not really my type of place. It was a fun night, but that's not my type of place. No, we went to a place called Bar George that I really like, that has great cocktails, a pretty good atmosphere and environment. There's some good stories about what happened with some of the rest of our crew that night, but I'll save those for another time. But in Boston, I'm looking forward to it. I like going down to the waterfront area, so I'm going to head down there for dinner on Sunday night, probably go to the North End on Monday night for dinner. The North End is a little more touristy these days, I think, than what it used to be, but there's still a few places I really like down there. Probably visit the South End for some music after dinner. There's a couple spots I like there. I'm excited to have a couple nights in Boston. It is one of my favorite cities, and we had a great night in Toronto. Terrific dinner with our good buddy Tommy Linneman there. Went out and had one of the better dinners I've had in a long time, inspiring a couple of things that will be on the menu in my kitchen, or at least my best effort to match what we had that night. That was really good. So it's been a good trip so far. Fun with Louis. Louis one of a kind, and he mentioned to me last night, we're going to have a graphic on it in the show tonight. said, the Wild don't lose very often when I'm here. He just has that. There's just something about his presence too, and he just says it with a smile, like like he's got some kind of aura that helps the club. And sure enough, I went and looked it up. He's done 23 games over the last 5 seasons, and the Wild are 17-5-1 when he's been in the booth. It's it's been, and we've had some great games too, some comebacks, some overtimes. It just feels like he just lives a blessed life, where wherever he seems to go, everything works out around him. And this trip's been no exception. Wes and Ryan been grinding it out with us all season. Louis comes along and we go win in Toronto without Kirill Kaprizov, and then we get the Marc-Andre Fleury night in Montreal. That might be the signature night of the entire season, maybe of the franchise history in the regular season, and Louis just happens to be there in the booth for it. So it's been one of those things.
Yeah, it's pretty neat, and to me, one of the most special moments was last year when he got to call his grandson's goal in a Minnesota Wild uniform in Long Island, and he'll get to call Vinny Lettieri being in the lineup again on Tuesday night, only as a member of the Boston Bruins. So pretty cool.
Anthony, he was with us for like a big comeback win down in Tampa one night and a win in Florida. He's just had a chance to see some great games, a couple of big wins in Carolina. It was interesting.
Yep, without a doubt.
Hey, I know you want to talk about blockbusters. Let me throw you. I got a couple of Vinny's thoughts that are related to blockbusters, and one might be one that you were going to touch on anyway. So I'll throw these out to you. One was, with the announcement of the projected cap increases, how much do you think, or do you know any more about what Rantanen was asking for in Colorado and how much that played into that trade with Carolina?
Well, I think that's exactly, and I actually wanted to pivot on how this affects the Wild, and that's how we could wrap up the show, Anthony, as well. All right, so if you didn't see, and if you haven't listened to the last couple of podcasts, I actually have been talking to Anthony about this. So I was starting to hear that not only was next year's cap going to be announced soon, but that it was going to be 2 or 3 years down the road. And I actually asked Gary Bettman about this recently, because I had heard that Andy Scott and the Colorado Avalanche were having a lot of issues because Colorado has their own internal cap and what they think it should be. But, the cap is going to skyrocket in the next couple of years. So they want to be paid, what it's going to be in a couple of years. And so the cap is going up to next year at 95.5, in 2 years, 104, and in 3 years, 113.5. Now, this is good news and bad news for the Wild, by the way, because next year, the Wild were hoping the cap would be 97. Now it's going to be 95.5. That actually lowers what they thought they were going to have available to them this offseason. Plus, they're going to have $1.1 million in bonus overages for bonuses that Brock Faber and Marco Rossi are definitely going to attain. So in terms of Rantanen, I think that he wanted to be the highest paid winger in the NHL, which obviously is more than Panarin at 11 point something, Anthony. But they also want to keep him below Nathan MacKinnon. And the other thing that they have to worry about is what Cale Makar is going to be asking in 2 years when the cap is 104 and going up from there, $9.5 million the following year. So Anthony, I just wonder if it just got to the point where they just said, let's just bite the bullet, get what we can from Mikko Rantanen, make sure that he doesn't get hurt during the Four Nations. Also, as they get closer to the trade deadline, their leverage goes down. I think that they just decided to make the move now, which for a Stanley Cup contender, shocking. So I think that had a lot to do with it, without a doubt. I don't think he was asking for like 15, 16, 17 million. I think he was going to take much less than he could have probably get on the open market. But I think he probably wanted to be a $13 million player, and they didn't want to go over MacKinnon. And then they wondered how that would affect the Cale Makar negotiations in the next couple of years. In terms of the Wild, and let's pivot this toward the Wild, Anthony. This is going to be really interesting now, because now we know exactly the max that Kirill Kaprizov can get. That would be 20% essentially of 104, which obviously if he wants to win, he's not going to be asking for 20 million. But he's going to be a $15-16 million player. I actually think, Anthony, and tell me if you would agree with me on this, I actually think that it is now going to be much easier for the Wild to extend him this offseason because of these injuries. Not because the Wild, it's going to bring his price down, but I think if Kirill Kaprizov has any brain in his head right now, he knows that if he has another injury like this next year, that that money would not be there in 2 years, whether it's from the Wild or somebody else. So I think when all of a sudden, when you have significant injuries and the Wild are throwing $100+ million on the table, life-changing money this summer, are you really going to wait and risk playing next year and risk getting hurt again and having, a significant injury? What do you think?
Yeah, no, remember we had a question of that at our live show at Elsie's last week, and that's exactly how I answered it. The question was, will Kaprizov's injuries knock down his price? And I said, that's exactly what I said, is that I believe it will, because it will force him to say, if I've got 8 million or 8 years at 15 million on the table from the Minnesota Wild, do I really want to take the risk of playing another season for another team that can only give me 7 years? They got to go to 17 and a half. And if I've been beat up a little bit this year, do I know for certain that 17 and a half is going to be there from some other team? So I think it does drive his price down, not because it's the Wild saying, well, he's not worth more. It's just that I think he's going to be more inclined to take the deal, take the sure bet, take the money right now that's sitting on the table, because I don't know how you go into another season. And frankly, if I'm another team, if I'm about to pour $17.5 million a year into a player, there's definitely going to be a little seed of doubt in the back of my mind. Like, okay, well, he has been injured. Yes, all accounts are that this injury is not going to be anything that affects the rest of his career, but there's no question it makes teams a little bit less likely to throw everything they have at one player. And let's be clear, in order to exceed what he would have on the table from the Wild, somebody else is going to have to go to like 18, maybe a little over 18, to exceed the total package that the Wild can offer him over 8 years. That's a big difference of, as you just said, $20 million is the max. Well, I don't think the Wild are likely to be able to win if they give him 20. He knows that. Well, what makes you think somebody else is going to say, we'll go to 18? Maybe somebody would, but would they then be able to win? I just think I think this is going to make it more likely that Kirill Kaprizov agrees to something in the 15 range over 8 years, just to avoid taking that chance.
I think the Wild start off, they are offering 112 over 8 years. It gets up to 120 over 8 years. He gets the 15 AAV. I think that makes all the sense in the world. Before we wrap up the show, Anthony, and you got to get over to the rink, and it's not easy to get an Uber where you're at that hotel. So I want to give you some time. But JT Miller traded to New York Rangers yesterday. That breaks off the long drama between Elias Pettersson and JT Miller. And then subsequently later, they trade the first round pick that they got in the deal with the Rangers to the Pittsburgh Penguins to get a package that includes Marcus Pettersson, Danton Heinen goes back to the Penguins as well. But JT Miller, that is somebody that the Wild were hoping that we get to the summertime and that they would go after. Now that doesn't happen. Obviously for a team that just felt like they needed to divorce JT Miller off that team, it puts Vancouver in a real tough spot now to make the playoffs. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, I agree. And really, the way the West is going, there's not a lot of wiggle room left for a lot of these teams. You're already getting to the point where it's going to be difficult to make up ground. And when you start to look, the 4 teams in the Central, I think, are all no-brainer playoff teams. And there are 2 in the Pacific that are no-brainer playoff teams right now. There just aren't that many positions left. And I think it's going to be hard. Now, maybe it's a team that takes off because you finally are done with the drama. And, we'll see. But I kind of like the deal Calgary made the other day to get Farabee and Frost from Philadelphia, where I think it's a Calgary team that's headed in the right direction. I think their rebuild and roster turnover is moving more quickly than even they expected. They get rid of Kuzmenko, who's been an absolute bust since he arrived in Calgary. Matt Coronado's been great for them, and now you add a couple good young players in Farabee and Frost. I really think that's a great deal for Calgary, where I think they're going to be a team that's probably got their best hockey of the season in front of them, and that's one of the teams that Vancouver's battling right now to stay alive. So who knows? You just never know. Sometimes a team galvanizes when you finally get rid of a guy that's been a lightning rod for trouble around there, and maybe we'll see that take off. They sure looked flat last night. I watched their game last night against Dallas, and they didn't have much in a 5-2 loss, 5-3 loss against the Stars. And so it's a team, I think, right now that's kind of looking for a leader, looking for. So Quinn Hughes looks beat up. I just don't see those guys making any kind of a major push.
Yeah, I would agree. And if you look at the standings, to your point, they're pretty much the only team on the outside looking in that I think really has a legitimate shot to get back in. Calgary just made a big trade. Colorado might, slip now without Rantanen, but we'll see what they do with that cap space that they just created. They obviously have the ability to make a move. And I fully expect that they will probably right after the Four Nations. It will be interesting to see if teams try to make some more trades either before the Four Nations or wait till after, because sometimes you want to get out of the cap hit before the Four Nations. But the other thing is if you have a player that you're trying to acquire that you're trying to trade before and they're going to the Four Nations, you might want to get rid of that player beforehand. Just to, alleviate any risk of somebody getting hurt. But really interesting what's going on in the Central right now. Top three, Winnipeg's won 5 in a row. Dallas has won 4 in a row. Minnesota's won 3 in a row going into tonight's game in Ottawa. Anthony, really good show. I'll give you a chance to get over to the rink. I have a ton of Twitter questions that we'll save for the live show at Splitrocks on February 5th. So if you didn't hear your question on here, which I know a lot of people didn't, I will bring my laptop over to Splitrocks on February 5th and we'll bring up some of these topics because there were definitely some good ones. That is a 7 p.m. show. Anthony, enjoy tonight's game in Ottawa. We'll see if you can if they can make this a perfect road trip so far, 4-0. What's your prediction?
I think the Wild will play well tonight, but I think this one is going to be the toughest game of the trip. I kind of thought that going in. I thought they'd play well in Toronto, and it's a Toronto club that isn't quite as dangerous as they've been. They might be more likely to win in the playoffs, but not quite as dangerous. I thought Fleury'd find a way in Montreal. I think they'll win in Boston. I think this was the one that was the toughest one of the trip. It's for some reason, it just always feels different here. And I know the Wild have played these guys pretty well lately. I think it's 12-2-1 in the last 15 head-to-head. But I think tonight's going to be a battle. I think they're going to need Philip Gustafsson to play like he's played his last 2 starts. And if he does, I think the Wild win a tight, low-scoring game tonight.
All right. Thanks to our incredible sponsors, Aquarius Home Services, your local authorized dealer for Connecticut water treatment systems, heating, cooling, plumbing, everything. Their Royal Credit Union, Fellers Ranch, On X Fish, Clam Shell Beach Resorts, and Giggly THC Beverages. Talk to you February 5th, Anthony.
So much coming out, there's nothing going in. I know that you feel like you're never gonna win. Oh, but the world won't forgive